Welcome back to the Human First podcast with me, Adrian Murphy. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Hogarth, who's a brand ambassador for Harris Tweed Hebrides. Hi Mark.
Hello, how are we?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Well, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, a bit about your story?
Well, the story is varied, and I think sometimes you can get caught up a little bit on self-analysis and how you got where. I guess one of the big touch points now is the whole sliding doors dynamic, about these key times in your life where you had choices. My initial aspiration going to university was to be a geography teacher. You know, I loved geography. I spent a lot of time in maps and a little bit in history. Maybe the history interest came a bit later. And then I think besides that, I was always interested in products and in luxury. You know, I used to be fascinated by anything from well-made football boots to well-made cars. But certainly at university it was geography, sociology first, and then an interest in politics came a little bit later, possibly in the third year. So I finally graduated, took a year out, and spent some time in London where there was a little bit of a fashion interest, and that was really just to, I guess, open up the dynamic of travel. I can distinctly remember taking my first long-haul flight in 1999, so I would be 23 at the time. Went to Cape Town, and I guess that then opened up that real love affair with travel, culture, and since then I think I've did 4 round the world flights. Definitely made the most of those multi-tickets that you used to get at SDA Travel and Trailfinders, which is definitely showing my or possibly our age. So really for those times it was about perpetuating, not perpetuating irresponsibility, but perpetuating travel and really trying to have a more acute idea of perhaps what I wanted to do as a career. And I think that's possibly a result of growing up on a farm in Ardrossan, wanting to do the travel, but also doing a geography and politics joint honours at Strathclyde University with great tuition and a good institution, but it didn't really send you down a particular path. So you get to 22, 23, and for me at that point it was really about trying to galvanise a short-term career to give me more time. And I think, perhaps I was a trendsetter in that, because it seems to be that a lot more people are trying to do that as well. The other, I guess, juncture that really moved me on was getting a chance to do the international modelling, which was a bit of an accident as well. I don't think I was particularly good at it. I certainly wasn't. I always kind of compared myself. I was a bit like, if you remember, Stoke City or Middlesbrough in the Premiership about 10 or 15 years ago, struggling mid-table, but they could still, beat Man U or, Chelsea at home occasionally. So that was a bit like my modelling career. I kind of had a classically Caucasian look, which went down very well in places like Hong Kong and Japan, and I had kind of Mick Jagger hips at the time, which meant that you fitted the clothes. And
what kind of waist was on those?
Definitely a 30 waist, 38 chest. Get that guy, not because he's particularly good, but because he'll fit the clothes. And that worked really well. I went to Japan for the first time in year 2000. And it was just a whole world had opened up there. Probably a bit like maybe going to one of the Chinese cities now. It was just, I think they already obviously stagflation had been sitting there post their economic boom, but it was still light years ahead of any other first world city in terms of technology. But the most interesting thing for myself, and I guess for many other travellers, even to this day, was just the cultural difference. There's no country in the world, or indeed no first world country in the world, where the cultural differences are so acute and indeed so charming. And I guess that was the element that I really fell in love with, and I was fortunate enough to go back there, I think 7 years in a row.
Wow.
And just during parliamentary recess, because simultaneously, a year later in 2001, I did a fashion show, ironically, to promote Harris Tweed, which was seemingly nadir, a real low point at the time. And I met Brian Wilson, who was then the Minister of Scotland, and obviously we had a chat about my political qualification, if you can call it that. And a year later, I started as his parliamentary researcher, which is on a part-time basis.
Yeah.
But that kept my cerebral element and alive and kicking just about, and also it just still meant that I could do a bit of part-time modelling and production work in London, and then also get away for a couple of months when it was parliamentary recess. So it was just, it's complete luck. Looking back, maybe I was a bit unfair to myself. You make your own luck, you make your opportunities. I don't think it was nepotism as such. It was just being fortunate enough to you meet good people, but also back that up with bringing something to the table.
Yeah, because it wasn't just it wasn't hiring you just because you're
the
hips like Mick Jagger, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. I've saw him this morning. I'm going to the football with him tomorrow night. So that's I think that's as good a testimony as the legitimacy of the relationship.
So those who are unfamiliar with Harris Tweed, maybe it'd be good to get a wee bit of. People will have an awareness, I'm sure, but it'd be good to get a bit of that understanding about the heritage and how it all works. Because we were chatting earlier, and it's actually really interesting how it all kind of works.
Indeed, Harris Tweed has, fortunately, an Act of Parliament that went through Westminster in 1993. It's 93, it's more than 93 pages long, but certainly, if you have any insomnia problems, then that's a good place to go. If you lose
you really want to dig into it.
if you lose your copy of War and Peace, then dig out the Harris Tweed Act of Parliament, and it's fascinating and it's detailed, and there's an incredible culture and community up there. But to distill it down, essentially, the three main tenets of that Act are that Harris Tweed has to be made in the Outer Hebrides, nowhere else. It has to use virgin wool, which comes from Scotland, and thirdly, it has to be made, and this is the most important part, at the home of the weaver. And with that, you can't have an atelier with 6 looms in it and 6 weavers. It is one croft or one house and one loom, one weaver, and that's the absolute the absolute essence of the production side of Harris Tweed. Obviously, it was there to try to keep people on the land. Outer Hebrides, one of the most beautiful places in the world, but for obvious reasons, socioeconomically challenged. It's not the land doesn't lend itself to great agriculture, just with its top soil. The wind, yeah, absolutely. If you want to have trees in your garden, then you need to buy a property in the east side of the island, because you're not going to do much with that westerly wind coming off the Atlantic. And but I mean, incredible villages, incredible community, incredible people, and obviously way back from Norse times, weaving had its a place in those communities, and that came all the way through 1700s into the mid 19th century, where you started to get organisation, but community interaction, and the initial history and heritage obviously was that Harris Tweed was then sold to merchants by a Lady Dunmore, who was one of the aristocrats in the island, and from there, you'd 50 years of growth until you had the Harris Tweed Authority, or Association as it was then, which came into inception, I think, in 1909, right. And then the world-renowned Orb trademark was put through the following year. So you really 70 years of organisational growth, and then trademark official 1910, and from then you had sequential growth all the way through to, I think the pre-production year was 1967.
Right. Okay.
Where about just over six times what is made now was made, and the majority of that was shipped out to the US.
Right.
If you can think of classic films like The Graduate or Dirty Harry from the 60s and 70s, Harris Tweed jacket was at the centre of both those characters. The Clint Eastwood character, obviously in Dirty Harry, and Dustin Hoffman. And it was a rite of passage. When you became 18 or 21 in the kind of classically US Presbyterian family, that was your rite of passage. You didn't get a watch. You got a Harris Tweed jacket.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it all came on the back of the kind of Ivy League collegiate style, which came into play in the 1940s and into the 1950s with your cotton, soft cotton chinos, a dress down shoe, and the Madras jacket in the summer and a Harris Tweed jacket in the winter. It was an absolute uniform, but then it caught on because of the durability and the functionality of it. And then the Japanese took that, and all of a sudden you've gone from just having a big US market to having a world market. The UK always ordered bits of Harris Tweed, but it was really quite a bit eclectic in the beginning. Used for, the NHS in Scotland had a Harris Tweed coat for I think certain district nurses. Right. I think beautiful blue Harris Tweed coat. Certain schools had it, but it didn't really have the same drive, that same cultural drive as the classic blazer, which obviously was predominant in the US market. So
going back then to your initial involvement with Harris Tweed, what were you doing at the time, and then how did that all come about? Yeah,
so I had it's a good question actually. I had done about maybe 6 months of the postgraduate in journalism. I still always had this interest. I do now, but it's not a career interest anymore, in current affairs. I really enjoyed working at Westminster. Did 4 years there. Brian was finishing up as a minister and as an MP in 2005, so I did the last 4 years with him. It was great. Had the run of the place. Cycled into Westminster. Had an office in the actual Parliament as well, and I decided, I think, I would do the postgraduate in journalism with a view to possibly working in news or broadcast journalism. But I guess my interest is more in foreign affairs rather than domestic politics. And I think also being about 6 months into that particular course, I just didn't think I had the right mentality for it. Right. And as a journalist, as a traditional journalist, you've got to do death knocks. You need to make really acute decisions about exposing people that may obviously affect their family. And I think the people I met, when I did 3 months at STV, were great people, great journalists. But I think there's a certain mentality that lent itself to that career that perhaps I didn't quite have. But I finished the course. Learned a lot of discipline and a lot of skills, which I think put me back on the right track after obviously travelling in the Far East for 4 or 5 years, and at Parliament maybe working to a slightly more looser schedule. And then just at that point I went back, did a final trip to Japan, and absolutely knew that it was time for me to move away from the fashion career, just because it was I think it had outgrown me rather than me outgrowing it. I think what did they say about what is Mike? I think Michael Caine famously says you don't stop acting, you just stop getting work. So you were still modelling. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just definitely not as successful as I was 3 or 4 years before. So they all came together, and at that point, Brian had an opportunity with an investor, Ian Taylor, sadly passed away 3 or 4 years ago, who was willing to put money into one of the mills. And Brian also had contacts in the island where he still lives through his wife. And Ian Angus Mackenzie, he came in as a real knowledge, absolutely ingrained in Harris Tweed as a weaver, then as chief executive of the Harris Tweed Authority, who was the perfect candidate to get it going as chief executive. I remember the first day the opportunity was put to me by Brian, and I looked up Harris Tweed and probably Wikipedia, as most people do with anything they don't know about. And I did know a bit about it. Obviously, I'd seen it, but I'd seen it through the Japanese perspective, just through the department stores that I'd been working with. And you look up Harris Tweed and it says, Harris Tweed, chief proponents are Miss Marple and Professor Langdon of the Da Vinci Code. Yeah. So you know at that point quite immediately that there is a slight image problem. Yeah. Much though I love Miss Marple, maybe not so much Professor Langdon. And you knew then that if we were going to make this work, we had to gravitate towards a younger demographic. And then I ingrained myself into learning about the product, learning about the heritage and the history of Harris Tweed, and you could see that there was nothing wrong with the product. Most of the time, when you've got a brand that's maybe fallen slightly out of favour from grace, is that there's something fundamentally wrong, and there wasn't at all. So I always saw there was a way back, and living in Japan, Scotch whisky was everywhere, particularly at the luxury level. Mm-hmm. And I think that was my first go-to to try to understand if Harris Tweed does well in Japan, but it's not really doing particularly well elsewhere. Scotch whisky is doing really well in Japan, then let's actually see the commonality between the two and what we can do here. And you realised it was about the detail. Scotch whisky is the best in the world, in my opinion. Obviously, the product's the best in the world, but the storytelling, which is the word that wasn't really used then, is better than anybody else. And obviously, nothing else can be Scotch. So for me, it was about getting into the detail. Yeah. And I think what worked in our favour back then, 2008, 2009, obviously there'd just been a global recession. Yeah. People were looking for... Indeed.
Still twitching.
Still twitching. You see, you're a way ahead in your career at that point. I wasn't exposed, because I'd been running around the world for 5 years, spending all the money that I was earning. So I think a few things came together, which obviously was the global financial dynamic, and then just this build-up of digital media, which is really gaining momentum, and the fact that people could get information on Harris Tweed online and get it in really deep detail. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the more authentic media you put out, then the more people looked at it, the more interest it could create. Yeah. So you weren't having to, deep dive into investment just to advertise as such. Yeah. You were at a very early stage of telling a story, and everybody loves the downtrodden brand that's making a comeback. So when Nike got involved with a big order to make a couple of shoes, then that was the first point, because that gives you a news story. News story gives you a little bit of momentum. Yeah. And then we get the documentary in, which wasn't particularly favourable. It was a bit negative, but again, it gives you exposure. It gives you free media. On the back of that, we did invest in doing a few shows around the world. We worked with an incredible designer, Derek Walker at the time, who was really, I think, quite ahead of the trends, so to speak, by the kind of cuts and designs that he was doing. Very tailored looks, really strong, bold colours, matching blue and black, which wasn't really been done then on the dark side, but then doing really bright mustards, right, and kind of sky blues as well. And that again gave us a little bit of attention. And the key thing I learned at that point is that you do an event, so you've got the actual event, but the more important dynamic of doing that event is the amplification of that event. Yeah. And that even I read kind of. I always try to read quite a lot of female media as well, and I think Grazia, I think we're talking about the IRL, in real life is back. Right. And for me, in real life's never left. We COVID a little bit. We might have all defaulted to our flats and our computer screens. But for me, the most important thing about the in real life event is then what you get on the back of that, and you just need somebody significant to see that, to then get an insight into what you do that maybe they think could work with them. Because at Harris Tweed, we are not the final product. We are the main component of the product. Yeah. I would hope that we are a world recognised, hopefully world renowned brand, but we are a component. We used to say, we're the champagne of fabrics until we got a polite letter from the Contrôle de Champagne to say that we couldn't use that phrase. Which I thought was a great compliment.
Yes, well, you noticed.
Yeah, indeed. But I think probably we're more akin to something like Pirelli. Pirelli. Yeah. Why is a Pirelli tyre a world-renowned brand? Well, because it's mostly on really good cars.
Yeah.
So I think we are, seen to be hopefully a really good cloth and a really good well-finished fabric, because the majority of the time it does end up in very good products and products that have got integrity, because we've got integrity.
Yes. Just flipping back onto you for a wee second, how does all of that, what is it about that obviously you're passionate about it, so what about your own kind of values and your goals, I guess, along the way? How did that end up coming to us? You've been involved with Harris Tweed now for what are we saying, gosh, 17 years or something? That's a long time,
It's absolutely, and I think you have to enjoy it, obviously, first and foremost, but I think you have to have the integrity to know that you're still giving something. You have something to give. You're having a positive impact. Our team changed slightly in the last couple of years, and we've got a great new chief executive, Margaret McLeod's in place, finance director. Just a really well run company. So, and they've, I think, and great ownership. Who step in and step out at the right times. I think when you've got that, then it's got to be something really quite special that you would want to bring you away from that. But also, because there's been a real roller coaster element to Harris Tweed as well, you take pride. It's very it creeps up on you. Whereby it becomes more than just a job and more than just a brand that you work with. It does actually become part of your identity as well.
Yeah,
so I'd like to think, I'm sure that there will come a time when you may look at doing other things, but as long as I feel I've still got value to give, and of course you're still enjoying it, which I am, then it's a great company and a great brand to work for, and just to see people in the different communities around the Hebrides taking so much pride in it. And also, I have to say, when I started it, I was one of the young ones, and now I'm one of the OGs. so
that's quite nice.
We have done an incredible job in just changing that demographic, because without that, the whole thing's gone. I think when I first came into the industry, the average age of the weaver was like late 50s.
Right.
The mill workers probably early 50s, and that's come way down.
And I guess that's really important there's a knowledge transfer there. The danger is with any of these kind of more traditional processes that eventually that knowledge disappears.
Absolutely.
So you've obviously managed to create an environment where that can sustain. Now it's being passed down generations.
It absolutely is. Now, and there's courses to be done. There's courses in the mainland that can teach you how to weave on the loom that you have in the Outer Hebrides, the bonus Griffiths loom. But ultimately, it does come down to that mentor and mentee relationship, and that was quite commonly done within the village communities. So just somebody kicking around, handing bobbins, tying in the tweeds to the loom, which is a really laborious task, and it's very time consuming. But that's craft. Whether you're making a pair of shoes in Northampton, or you're cutting cutting fine luxury suits in Italy, the craft is there. It's not about time, and I think we've been part of that whole redefinition of luxury. For a while, luxury was about advertising and brand aspiration and logos, and that's still there a little bit. But I think those are the companies and the brands are getting caught out now, because unless you have that authentic brand story of which your craft and your making and your production is transparent, then I think you're going to be in a little bit of trouble.
It's nothing. There's no story behind it.
No,
I guess.
No, not at all.
There's no.
No, and therefore you can't then justify if you can't justify a high price point if you can't be transparent on how your product's made. I really do passionately double down on the difference between a brand and a product. Some people say, and it comes to communication as well, but I will always say the product's more important than the brand, because it's not you that decides you've got a brand, it's the people consuming your product. And if your product's not right and you're not transparent about how that product is made, you've got much less chance of winning the brand story.
Well, I was going to ask, what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs that might want to build or evolve a heritage brand? Because I'm aware of a few people that I know that have brought old brands back to life. They've bought the watches and various other things. What advice would you give them? Because that seems quite pertinent to what you're just saying.
Yeah, I think you have to have a deep interest, passion, belief in the product itself. If you have to make the numbers work in terms of the investment and where the investment is coming from. If it's a big investment, I think, coming from a hedge fund or business, then I think patience on their part, and not just about turning a quick product, because the chances are, if it's a heritage brand, you're going to have a good 3, 4, possibly 5 years.
There's a rebuild first, isn't there?
Of rebuild, because you've got to find a new market. The new market might be related or predicated on the traditional demographic that bought the product before, but I think you have to convince people this is an investment and not just an expense. And if you're not absolutely dialed into making that product as good as it was, keeping the authenticity of what was before, but adding to that, every single heritage brand will have the right way to bring it back to market. But I think you have to understand the product, the process, the authenticity, and how that brand came to be successful in the first place. So it's almost like that kind of modern Janus. You've got to have one head looking backwards and one head looking forwards. You've got to have an appreciation of the past, but also you've got to really have eyes on the future as well. And I think that comes to, in my opinion, it comes to really anything today, whether it's a tangible product, or something a little bit more finance or farmer related, tech related. You need to double down and understand the product in a really acute manner before you start talking about brand stories and how you're going to market it.
Yeah. So what's next for you and for Harris Tweed?
I think we've had a great year in terms of the projects we've worked on, from Dior to Adidas Samba. FootJoy has been perennially very good.
I need to get myself a pair of them, actually. Do you know what I can get?
We can see what we can do. See what we can do. We also have an incredible domestic market, working with companies in Scotland. So I think it's about really working as we have done, but we're always looking for those minor iterations. There's a big investment that's just gone on at the mill. We've invested in extra storage space. We put in just a few years ago a new dyeing house. There's new workers facilities as well, because obviously, as we all know, only cut a company is only as good as your workforce and how happy and content they are.
There would be so many opportunities to get distracted and go chasing shiny things and ultimately dilute the product for the brand and all that stuff, and that's just not. It's not part of it. It's not part of the culture there.
No, absolutely. And I can remember distinctly those conversations. I remember there was probably even at one point when Harris Tweed was at its absolute nadir, administrators circling around some of the businesses, talking about Harris Tweed being monolithic. I always thought part of its positive dynamic was that it is monolithic, and that's came to fore in the craft industry and some of these heritage brands. Do what you do it really well, try and do it better than anybody else, and that's a much bigger guarantee of longevity than trying to be
like a quick buck or something.
Cliche jack of all trades, or try and diversify.
Yes.
There's a lot of companies that they do that successfully, but ultimately, if you think of Burberry, you're going to think of a trench coat. If you think of Johnsons of Elgin, you're going to think of one of the best, cashmere producers in the world. And I think these are the companies that will have those discussions at board level all the time. There's my dad's quite a traditional Ayrshire farmer, and definitely definition of success was running a good farm. It wasn't getting rich or and the kind of Ayrshire farming, which I agree part of, but not other, is flee low and you'll flee far. Now don't know whether that was from the golf courses or from the farming communities down there, maybe both. But I think if you have that, but occasionally just know when you want to spike it, occasionally know when it's right to be a bit more ambitious or possibly take risks, but don't do anything that's going to affect the authenticity or indeed the future of your industry.
And that's the lens with which these decisions are made.
Yeah, they are.
Which you have to have that, right? What context are we making a decision in, and you follow that. That's brilliant. So just thinking about you, going back to you for a wee second, from your kind of late 20s, sharing a flat and kind of largely living week to week, I guess, month to month. How do you view things differently now? What does all this kind of give you? There's obviously a great passion, as we touched on, but great fulfillment and in terms of your career ambitions, what you want to do.
Yeah. I have really enjoyed over the last 5 years. We did one project with the Glasgow Caley University. On the back of that, I've done some guest lectures, a bit of teaching there. I think at one point, maybe 10 years ago, I did a bit of external consultancy work as well, which was great. I like the writing, obviously the presentation, they get into brands. Actually, I think learning bit more about a few other brands probably helped me with Harris Tweed as well. But I think it got to the point where you realised that, do you want to do that? Do you want to work, the 60, 70 hours a week, to buy the bigger flat, to buy the Porsche? And I just don't think it was me. I because a bit like my dad, the definition of success was a little bit more nuanced than that. Last 6 years really, Harris Tweed's been the focus. Probably the best financial decision I ever made was when I moved flats. I managed to hold on to the first flat, and that was just a kind of accumulation of a bit of saved income. And just being in quite a good position at that point, and that's now allowed me to, how might you say, get over a few bumps in the road. With COVID, obviously, where we all had to take a hit. We all had to take a hit on our incomes. So I'm in a good place now with that, and I just think I've got the balance now of health and wealth. I know there's a lot of books been written on this, so there's an absolute optimum that you want to hit. I think we all, we all could do with, I'm sure, more money, but it's what does that give you? There's all these analogies of, people working so hard, but then they've got to spend all that money because they're not healthy because they've been working too hard or not working right to the detriment of your health. So I am a great believer in that. I think been back in Scotland now for 15 or so years. I've got a real appreciation of the countryside. I mean, the weather is bad here, there's no doubt, and I absolutely do need
Even yet you were on your bike this morning.
I was on my bike,
super impressive.
Cycled here, the green machine. So I do, I'm definitely having a midlife crisis on two wheels, but not been married yet, and I can't get divorced, and not been rich enough to buy a Ferrari or a Porsche, so it was quite a sensible option. So there's definitely for me there's a sweet spot between your work life, your finances, and your health, and there's definitely a few times where working too hard, traveling too hard, and your body just breaks down. I get a condition like almost kind of all body tiredness. So your brain just doesn't work properly. Your body just goes into a kind of tight, unresponsive way. And it's happened maybe 2 or 3 times in my career over the last 15 years. I think at that point, you have to slow down. So for me, there's definitely the possibility of a pivot at some point, but I'm not somebody that's going to retire. I was with Brian Wilson this morning, and he still sits on 3 boards, and he's in his late 70s now, healthy, happy. Retirement was never an option. No. I just don't ever see myself retiring, because hopefully with my attitude now at 48, I will still be fit and healthy in 15, 20 years time, and you still want to work and you still want to have impact, because for me, my success is not really about the bank balance or buying the bigger house or the bigger car or the better car. It's really about that kind of nice little triangle of value, health, and obviously happiness.
That's probably a brilliant way to finish off. I think that's fantastic. It kind of encapsulates everything that kind of we try and talk about with people, to try and figure out, right, in amongst all of this career money stuff, what really matters.
Yeah. No, I completely. I mean, the human first, I think, is something that we can all engage with, and the human is you. So if you think, plus the fact you have to question motivation. I've always been quite good, I think, probably from reading quite a lot of philosophy at university and maintaining that is actually going deep on your wants, and questioning everything that you're thinking, that you're doing, and if it doesn't just feel right, then take a pivot at that point. But also, I think in interpersonal relationships, that's really important too. Is that what are you imparting? How are you making people feel? I've always been a team player, or tried to be a team player, and I've always enjoyed, because I've seen people do it very well in business, is to be authentic, but also, we've all got competition, around us in terms of that industry, but be respectful to that as well. I
think you're right. I think authenticity is one of the key tenets. If eventually, without that, it's like you're talking about the brand with Harris Tweed. Without that, eventually you're probably going to get found out, or you're not going to be as successful in whatever way we define that as you could have been if you're not being true to yourself.
No, completely.
And I always think the other thing that's so important is you have to give. It's not a case giving back. Like, yes, we want to give back to our communities and people that have helped us, but just give yourself. All the time. It comes back.
No, absolutely. I think there's giving out, but you've got to enjoy that, in an altruistic way. I'm
without expecting
any return. I'm a trustee at SmartWorks, incredible charity helping unemployed women back into work. Hopefully, I can add some value to that, but I enjoy it. There's something really good there. But similarly, as my friend who worked quite intensively at Condé Nast said, sometimes you've got to make an appointment with yourself. If you don't put that into your diary, then you don't have as much to give. Because you don't have that enthusiasm, you're fatigued, or even unconsciously fatigued, and I think that's the best way. It's fine having a 6 or 7 figure salary, but if you're on Prozac, then you're not really winning.
We do have one more thing that we like to do. So we have a wee question which the previous guest has left, which I'm about to be handed. Thank you very much. And what I'd like to do while you're thinking about, if you can think simultaneously, is answer the question, but also think of one that you would like to leave for our next guest as well. So Ewan McLean of the McLean brothers, who are about to set off on to row across the Pacific, right, as one does. We talked a lot about outlook and being positive, because that's one of the training that they have to do, and to be in a boat, a tiny wee rowboat, 3 of them for 120 days potentially. You've got to be able to find a positive in every situation. So what do you do to have a positive outlook? There's a question here, I think it's quite an interesting one.
To have a positive outlook, regardless of how bad or how compromised a situation is, I always look back to previous bad situations and the fact that you got out of that. So just, it's not it's one thing to say, just be happy, be positive.
Yes,
I think for me,
kind of happy clappy.
Happy clappy. It's not going to get you out of that situation. But I think if you double down on like this is a small, tiny fraction. So I've got kind of logic element that takes over. That's a small, tiny fraction of your life, which is only going to affect you for a tiny part of your life. Make logical decisions, and good things will happen.
Yeah. As I mentioned, we like to leave a wee question for the next guest. So what would you like to leave for the next guest I have on the podcast?
My question to the next guest would be, if you had 1 month with no responsibility for family or work, so an absolute write-off, for 1 month, with unlimited budget, where would you go and what would you do?
Brilliant. Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you very much. Listen, we could talk all day. I think we may have to do this again because there's so much of kind of some of your earlier experiences that I think it'd be fascinating to dig into. I've got a real interest about Japan. My brother spent 12 years there, married a Japanese woman, and we've got my niece is half Japanese, and we're planning a trip out there. But we funnily enough, on Saturday we went, or Friday, went for a wee beer. And we were just chatting, because I was saying, look, we're thinking of going in the next kind of 18 months. And we really got into some of his experiences. He lived there for 12 years in Tokyo, and just some of what you're saying really kind of resonated with that. But I'd love to, I think it's interesting to hear more about how, you know, those experiences and how they've shaped, you know, where you are today.
No, I'd happily come in, talk about travel, or, you know, we could go a bit deeper into these other things.